Thank you so much for being here. So much has been said about China by your campaign and by your opponents, specifically when it comes to foreign land ownership. You've been on both sides of this issue over the years. As state senator in 2013, you supported a push and helped override a veto to sell some land to foreign entities, but now back new restrictions. What is your position on this today?
Yeah, the 2013 vote was about saving 450 jobs in Northwest Missouri. It was not specifically about a China land issue. But relationships have changed with our country since then, and I've been very clear for the last several years that enemies of our country, and there's a list of enemies, it's about 7 long, it's who you would think, China, Russia, Venezuela, etc., should not only not own farmland, but they should not own businesses in our state. So I don't want to balance this problem on the backs of Missouri's farmers. I believe across the board it should be nothing they should be able to own here.
Some of them already do, as you said. How would you retroactively change that then as governor?
Well, you've looked at other states who have tried that and they've been challenged several different times. So the first thing you would do is you want to stop any more from going forward. And then you'd want to work with those businesses to figure out a way, if there's a way to get them out of that solution.
Earlier this year, the Governor Mike Parson banned foreign adversaries, what you were talking about, that group of people, from buying agricultural land within 10 miles of what he calls critical military facilities. Do you support a wider ban beyond that?
Yes, I stood with the governor actually at that press conference and for that executive order. That's all the Constitution allowed him to do based on what his authority did. The legislature will have to move legislation forward to extend that. If I'm chosen as governor, I will work that as a top priority for the legislatures to come up with a version that makes sure our enemies are not allowed to own property here in Missouri.
Recently, it was revealed that the bus you leased for the campaign was owned by a lobbyist employed by a Chinese business with interest in Missouri. Objectively, that's not a good look. What's your take on
Well,
that?
they're grasping at straws. Whenever the competition feels you have a chance to win something, they're going to shoot you from every spot of the angle they can. I mean, it's ridiculous. We fully disclosed on the Missouri Ethics Commission all of the pieces of our lease that my wife and I did personally, by the way. The campaign had nothing to do with that. So it's just desperation at the last minute.
We talk about just the heated rhetoric in this campaign. There's been a lot of flash, a lot of back and forth, very contentious, especially on the Republican side. Where do you stand on that right now going into the election?
Well, unfortunately, it's the tone that politics have gotten to, but I think it also demonstrates the difference between me and some of the other candidates in the race. They really want to govern by chaos and by screaming and hollering and yelling. Certainly that's one way to communicate with folks, but I'm a relationship person. I'm going to work with people to get a conservative solution to the problems Missouri faces, but we're not going to do it through chaotic measures.
We will say that PAC supporting you did put out an ad in Chinese that was an attack ad on Jay Ashcroft. What say you about that?
Unfortunately, as you know, with Missouri laws, and in their defense, the other candidates cannot tell the PACs what to do or what not to do.
Let's talk a little bit about Jeff City and gridlock. Historically, in the past few years especially, we've seen a lot of gridlock, especially within the Republican Party, blocking several conservative issues from getting through. As governor, how do you work to clear that up and get a working relationship going?
Well, sure. I was fortunate enough to serve in the Missouri Senate, including 3 years as a majority leader. I worked with a lot of personalities in the Senate, so I do know how to understand ways to make Missouri move forward. Our elections are going to change what the makeup is of the House and Senate this year because of term limits and certain people who can't serve any longer. So let's wait and let's see how the makeup of the Senate and the House is. If I'm elected as governor, I believe I will be able to work together with both House and Senate leadership. And by the way, the House has, for the first time since 1850, the Speaker will be Representative John Patterson. A great relationship with him, and whoever the pro tem is in the Senate, I believe it will be Cindy O'Laughlin. We will be able to work together to move the critical issues forward, including a good conservative agenda.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because you talk about the makeup of the House and Senate hinging on the November election. There's also likely going to be a ballot initiative on just protecting abortion rights in Missouri. When you're looking at this from a strategy point of view, what's going through your mind as far as protecting Republican seats or potentially seeing new Democratic leaders?
Well, I absolutely believe that Missourians, I hope and pray that Missourians will help us defeat, should that initiative make it to the ballot, for protecting innocent life is the #1 thing I think any elected official should do, and certainly with the record that I have. So we can work to defeat that initiative and then also work to make sure Republicans continue to get elected here in the state. Missouri is a very good conservative Christian values state, and I believe will come out well in November.
If it does pass and you are elected governor, how do you treat that issue moving forward?
Well, I have an opponent, for instance, Secretary of State Ashcroft said if that passed and he was elected governor, he would quit. I would suggest that the pro-life community If unfortunately that initiative passes, you don't want a governor who's a quitter at that time. You want somebody who's going to always work to protect innocent life. As governor, as senator, I've always had that track record. As governor, I will continue that track record.
Let's talk about taxes. Years ago, you've got a history in automobiles, safe to say, and highway work with the state. You supported raising a gas tax in Missouri, which goes toward improving and building roads. Being hammered on that by the other members of this campaign, your opponents here. Typically, conservatives are against tax hikes. Does that help or hurt you in this campaign?
Well, let me just say a couple of things. I was the first candidate in this race to sign the No New Tax Pledge with the Norcourse Institute. The other candidates soon came around, but I was the first one to do that. I've supported over $2.4 billion in tax cut, putting money back in Missourians' pockets. I think that's the most important thing we can do. And when it comes to infrastructure investment, it's not unusual for conservatives to be behind that. Governor John Ashcroft was the last one to increase the state's gas tax back in the 90s, and he did it because it was a conservative solution to a problem we knew we had. And so supporting infrastructure investment has not been unusual for infrastructure Republicans.
Mm-hmm. You and your opponent support the removal of a state income tax, which is the vast majority of where Missouri gets its general revenue. How do you make up for that shortfall, the billions and billions of dollars coming?
Well, look, what Missourians need to understand is since I've been in the Senate in the last several years, we've taken Missouri's personal income tax from 6% down to 4.7%. The entire time you have not seen a depletion in service. We've fully funded education, we've funded our roads, we've funded critical infrastructure needs and public safety. So there's a way to get there. We have a plan to get there. We have Senator Jim Talent as one of our advisors on this campaign, and we believe that putting money back in Missourians' pocket is the best thing we can do. It's the old Ronald Reagan theory. If I give Missourians back money, they'll spend it back into the economy, and the ripple effect will help us get where we need to go.
Understandably, though, going from 6 to 4.7 is different than going from 4.7 to nothing.
But we've done it over a structured period of time that's been responsible, and that's the same way we can go from 4.7 to 0. We can definitely get there.
There are many similarities, as we said. That's just one with you and your opponents. How do you differ from them?
Well, I'm a person that ends up putting relationships together. I'm going to work with people to drive to the solution that we need. Some of the proposals that our opponents, for instance, Senator Eigel has, he's had it in the legislature for 6-7 years. He's never even gotten a committee hearing because nobody respects or wants to work with him on his ideas. You need a governor that's ready to lead the state, that will work with other people and other people will work with them in order to move the state forward.
With Republicans working to grow the base and get people out to the polls on August 6th, how do you do that and then push forward to a general election in November where you're not alienating the other side? How do you create those relationships with people who might not agree with policy on them?
It's going to take somebody with my background, somebody who started with nothing. I definitely know what hard times and hard work does to solve hard times. Came from very humble roots and been successful in 35 years of small business, 40 years as a cattle producer in the agriculture industry. I have a diverse enough background to help bring people together and get the party where it needs to be.
What's the first policy you put into place day one if you're elected governor?
If I'm fortunate enough to win Missourians' trust, when my hand comes off the Bible, we enact a day one crime plan. I'm the only candidate in this race with not only 25 endorsements, but 4 endorsements for all the statewide public safety, police chiefs, state troopers, sheriff's association. They're working with me to craft our day one crime plan. We will enact it day one after my hand comes off the Bible.
Gun violence is a huge issue in Kansas City and St. Louis as well on the other side of the state. We saw that with the Chiefs rally shooting in February. Would you support common sense gun laws like universal background checks and the like?
Look, I grew up in North St. Louis City. I grew up in a very rough neighborhood. My first weapon was from a gang fight that I found on the street. The people that I know that are causing problems with guns did not go to Bass Pro to buy them. And so every time we want to enact stricter gun laws, we actually affect the citizens who are law-abiding that they can't do something else. I think we ought to enforce the laws that are on the books, and if we do that, I think, and work with our police and get right prosecutors in place, a lot of things will change in the violence.
But person to person, you would not support a...
No.
Okay. Let's talk about Kansas City Police. I mean, that's state-run, as you know. I know there's a push to bring St. Louis back under state control. What's your take on that with KCPD? Because leaders in Kansas City are pushing to break free of state control.
I'm a big fan of state control, especially for Kansas City. I've been on a big push with the St. Louis Police Department to bring St. Louis back under state control. St. Louis was under state control, and as you know, several years ago, it went to local control, and that has not worked very well at all. And I think it's a model that we should learn from, and we should keep Kansas City under state control, and I'll work very hard as governor to get St. Louis back under state control.
What would you change at KCPD?
For one, the funding mechanism. I would encourage everybody to vote for the amendment that's going to be on the ballot just a few days from today that gives the constitutional level that was sponsored by Senator Tony Luetkemeyer. It's a statewide vote to make sure Kansas City Police Department gets funded at a certain level. The current council is funding them above that level. That's good. This just gives them a safety net. But we need, when they've had over $40 million cut, they're down 330 officers in KCPD. You can't protect the community the way it needs to be with those resources being that low.
We've had a big issue this year in Kansas City with the sports teams and talk of them jumping ship and maybe going over to KCK or jumping the state line into Kansas. How would you as governor work to keep the teams in Missouri?
Yeah, sure. You know, I'm not a fan of spending public tax dollars on stadiums, but I am a fan of economic development. And I say all the time, if the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals, if you took their last names off of those businesses and said it was Joe's Widget Factory, and they're a very important economic development operation in our state, they provide jobs, they provide an economic impact, and they wanted to move to some other state, everybody and their brother would be saying, how do we save that Joe's Widget Factory? We need to look at this conversation where it's a good return for investment on taxpayer dollars. You never want to get an economic development incentive out there that's a horrible return for Missourians. There's a way to use tools in the toolbox that we already have and work with the community to make sure we keep the Chiefs and Royals here in Missouri where they belong.
Do you agree with the Star Bonds proposal in Kansas? Missouri does not have that tool in their toolbox.
They don't have that tool. They've had some problems with the Star Bonds, as you know, over the past, and they have a problem that we don't have. They don't have a stadium at all. And so they're really starting from scratch, and we're starting from a little different position.
All right. Bottom line, what should voters know going into the polls?
They should know that I'm a person who started with very humble beginnings, that I've owned small businesses for 35 years. I've created hundreds of jobs over those 35 years. My single mother raised me as a Christian conservative. That's who I'm going to be. I'm never going to abandon those values. And I believe my farm of governance and leadership is something very different than the other people in the field. I can put all of those policies in place, all of the experience that I've had through life to run Missouri. I'm ready to go on day one.
Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.